All right, let's get started for lab. And some more people coming in. We're going to get started for lab 16 here, lab number 16. And I made this mysterious for a reason. You know, I just called it transducer alignment. That's kind of abstract, isn't it? Right? So let's jump right into it here. And we'll talk about what we're going to do today. So transducer alignment. So obviously that hints to the idea that we can align any kind of transducer, meaning speaker or microphone. And we're going to do a little bit of both today using SMART to do this really refined and in a really precise way. You know, I'm one of those people that kind of believe that, you know, if you're a craftsman, then precision is part of your deal. Even though we work in an industry in live sound where you don't have the time to be precise sometimes, you have to just kind of rough things in and get going. But, you know, I want you to take all of this today from the mindset of if and when you have the time to do it, you'll want to do it. It makes a difference. You know, we should all live in that concept of details make the difference. You know, details are important. We should all be detail-oriented persons. That does not necessarily mean we can get to every single one of them, but when we can, we should. Okay? So, that in mind, today we are going to be moving audio through air. And because of that, there's a couple of presentations I do where I talk about the difference between propagation and latency, because these two things are kind of interchangeable in our language sometimes, and they really shouldn't be. You know, propagation is sound moving through air, right? That is what we are talking about when we say propagation and all the artifacts that come with moving through air, whereas latency is really a short delay, you know, between when an audio signal enters a system and when it emerges, okay? So, you know, when you hear me talking about latencies, usually that's inside of a system somewhere or inside of a connection scheme somewhere. But once we move to propagation, we're talking about moving audio through air. So today we're going to be talking about what happens when you move it through air. Okay, so let's go to here. So we're going to start off with a couple of just really basic speaker alignment concepts here, okay? So obviously if you're in a control room, like a 5.1 control room, etc., you know, one of the things they pay very critical attention to is arrival time to the listener from any one of the speakers. And you want this to match, really, in a lot of cases, especially so when you are mixing in stereo, which is a lot of what we do. So, you know, this can apply even if you're set up maybe in a rehearsal where you're mixing on control room monitors, whatever, you know, you might want to pay attention to this. If you're mixing for a medium, meaning like, you know, a recording, a stream, etc., where you're going to be working entirely on control room monitors, I would strongly suggest you pay attention to this. But, you know, the thing I'm going to try to show to you today is that we pay attention a lot of times to the distance and the angle, but we can actually take that one step further by using an FFT to actually get these two speakers perfectly in phase and create the sweet spot where you have, where at the listening position, there is no comb filtering between these two devices, right? Which is what we want, because, you know, if we were listening something, a phantom image up the center of this, right? Let's just do the simple math, right? If I was listening to a phantom image from a pair of speakers and they were offset by an inch in terms of their phase, right? Well, that's going to create a comb filter of that phantom image, is it not? And it's going to be the first cancellation, a complete cancellation at 5K with 10K spacing. That would be hardly optimum for anything where you're making frequency assessment of what is going to go out in the world, right? You're already starting with equalization on it, so you want to get these two things really, really in phase if you can do it. And I've got to the point where I just do this. I don't care whose control room I'm going in. You know, I'll just pull up my SMART and just kind of go, I just want to check my listening position here to make sure what it is. So, you know, matching distance and angle is critical. Phase aligned is more accurate, all right? So I'm going to move us over to our first actual demonstration here. We're going to jump right into the demonstration portion of the show here. Let me get this over here where we can see it, hopefully. Oops. So we're going to actually phase align a pair of speakers here, just to give you some sense of what this is like. We're going to go to this view. It might get a little hard to see in here because it's a little dark in here, but I'm going to pull this down a little bit where you can kind of see it. Can everybody see the overhead view and the smart there? Yeah? Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to switch mics, and you should be able to still hear me. I'm on headset now. Give me a thumbs up. Everybody still hear me okay? All right, so I've got a pair of speakers sitting back here that are just spaced evenly on the console, okay? And I've also got a microphone right here. This is just an analyzer mic that I've got hooked up to Smart. So the first thing we're going to do is, to get these in play, is we're going to take a reference trace of either one. It doesn't really matter which one. You've got to just pick one as a reference, okay? So maybe I'll look up here. Maybe, I don't know where to look. So we've got to grab a reference trace from one, and then we are physically going to move the other monitor to get it to lay perfectly in phase on the other reference trace. Everybody follow me there? So we're actually going to line a pair of speakers here. So let me get some noise going. Oops. Sorry about that. We are on the wrong device. We need to be here. And on. Okay, so you can see that arrival time there is late, so we're going to have to go ahead and do a delay locator for that. So we're going to find that. 2.10 milliseconds, that sounds all right. Okay. So just keep in mind when we're doing this, you want your microphone to be at your listening position. You want it to be right where your head is going to be, right? So even though I've got it set up on the desk here, that would not be what I would normally do here. I would, sit down, get my position kind of sorted out, where I want to sit, and then replicate that with the microphone really right where my head is going to be. And you want it to be right center where you're going to sit and do your critical listening. Okay, everybody with me? All right, so we're going to store this. Right, so now we got the stored trace. You can kind of see it there. And we're going to turn on the other speaker now. And we'll get the same amplitude here, as you can kind of see. And you can see that even though these speakers are equidistant, they're on the same edge of the consoles, they're asymmetrical, right? So you can tell if you were sitting in the center of the console, you would not be sitting in the sweet spot. You can see it's a few phase wraps out of being in phase at the top end. You would start having problems there at, looks like at about 2.5K, and have some wraps on up there to create some cancellation on things that you're listening in the center at, okay? So we're going to start physically moving this speaker now to try to get it to line up. Okay, so that's pretty close, right? So now what you're going to be able to say with really, a lot of confidence is when my head is sitting where that microphone is, I'm going to get perfect addition between those two those two speakers, right? I'm going to hear very accurately. For things that are out to the left and right, we don't care about that really in that sense. I mean, if you want to get some angling to get your, get your listening right, like I showed you in the diagram there, that 35-degree angle or whatever it is. Pay attention to that. But in terms of distancing, I don't even trust tape measure for this. I'll get it close with a tape measure and then really tweak it in with Smart. You can get it close with a tape measure, and that will get you in the ballpark, but just pick one as a reference, start moving the other until those two traces lay right on top of each other, and now you got a great listening position there. Okay? Does that making sense to everybody? It says my gate is cutting off part of my words. I don't think I have a gate on this. Okay, let me just shut this down. So everybody, let me switch back over here. Everybody kind of getting the concept there of, I mean, it's really no different than we do with PA systems, etc. Now, obviously, the kind of rule that we're talking about here is it has to be identical sources if you're going to do phase alignment there, right? I mean, you couldn't take two different speakers and hope to get that kind of alignment because they're going to have two different phase responses because of their design topology anyway, right? So that's a little tougher to do. But you can look at it in terms of relativity for sure. This is no different than we do in PA systems, really, when we're doing, you know, whether we're going to do impulse or phase alignments. We've just chosen to do a phase alignment there, right? Any questions there before I move on? Okay, let's go to the next drawing here. So this is another one that I've been doing for a while, and I've kind of turned some people onto this this approach to doing this, both studio guys and live guys, and they love the result of this. And I know I do too. Once I started doing this, you know, my drum mixes instantly got better for sure. Now there are some, I don't want to call them rules, but just some guidelines on when you're going to do this. But let's talk about just some things that we normally do with a drum kit and how we can kind of get ourselves in trouble, not trouble, but have some challenges once we start adding distant microphones here. All right, so we're looking down on a, what is a 6-piece kit here, right? This would be a very common setup. And let's just start by using a stereo microphone. We won't even talk about using a spaced pair of microphones yet. Let's just put a stereo microphone up. And, you know, I've seen guys do this where they'll put this right up over the center of the kit, right? Now, if we're talking about rock and roll music, we're talking about the vast majority of the music that we're going to do, these kind of approaches are in play in terms of what we're going to do with the pan knob. Nice Royer mic, somebody recognized it, yeah. So here's the challenge if you take and put that microphone directly over the center of the kit, right? It's that the snare drum is going to be off center when you pan out that microphone left and right. It's actually going to sit off to, in this situation, the right. We're going to look at audience perspective here, right? So the snare drum is actually showing up on the right-hand side of our image. So if we instead take the microphone and move it directly over the snare, now the snare is going to show up centered in that stereo image. And why is that a big deal? Because we almost always, convince me that you guys don't do this, always take the close mic on the snare drum and pan it center. Do you ever pan it slightly right? More often than not, no. I mean, you might do this for jazz. If you're trying to create a drum image that absolutely matches that drum image that is being seen on stage. Matter of fact, in jazz, you might not even use a close mic on the snare, right? So, but in this situation, if we're going to add that snare drum, that close mic snare drum, to this overhead, and this overhead is part of the snare sound, meaning it's got, you know, it's not rolled up to just be a cymbal mic, right? The drum sound is actually a component being created by this overhead mic. Then this is real. This is actually a problem, because now we've got a close mic in the center, and we had an overhead version of that snare drum that is pulled to the right. And when you try to add those together, it's not going to be that good. The other, now we get away with it. I'll go back to this piece of it. We get away with this here in XY because the arrival time of the snare drum to the stereo mic is so close, right? To either side of it, it's so close. So even if we mono that stereo mic, it's not really going to comb filter that snare sound. It's not going to EQ the snare sound. Only in the very, very top end, because the offset is going to be, my goodness, it's probably going to be 1/4 of an inch at most, right? In terms of arrival time of the snare into the left and the right side of that microphone. But once we want to add it to the snare drum, then it becomes the issue, right? So, when you do this, and this is going to be a theme kind of going forward when we're talking about these spatial placements, be cognizant of what you're doing with it, right? Don't go totally by visuals. I can't tell you how many guys I see do this, even setting up in the studio. I see them doing it, where they will look at the drum kit and then evenly space the microphones left to right over the kit without any sense of what is going to be the center image of those two microphones, right? It's not going to be the bass drum. And, it's just, because you're probably going to roll that out, you're probably going to definitely be out of the fundamentals of the bass drum in the overhead, right? Are you following me there? All right, so let's take a look here. So once you have that microphone directly over the top of the snare, now you have the close snare and the image that is being created in the spaced mic, and they'll add together perfectly. I mean, really, really great. There is distance, don't get me wrong. If we add the close snare and the distant snare, of course, there's going to be some comb filtering in it. I concede that one. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that distance. What I'm not okay with is snare drums that are, right heavy on the spaced pair and then a center mic trying to add with that. They just never seem to add right. In that situation, the image is the challenge, not the frequency response, right? The image is the challenge. You'll see this more as we move to an actual spaced pair here. All right, so let's talk about a spaced pair now and see the challenges that come with this. All right, so this is close mic versus split miking. Yeah, split miking, yeah. So we're going to go back to our close mic being panned center in our stereo mix, right? And then we're going to place a pair of overheads. And this is kind of what I talk about when I see guys just place this evenly over the kit. Well, if you do that, look at the arrival time of the snare drum into the one on the right versus the one on the left, right? I mean, look at it. It's perfectly balanced left to right over the bass drum, but it's, the snare image on that, if we pan it out and just listen to the snare drum in the overheads, it's going to be pushed off to the right, right? It's not going to add up image-wise correctly with that close snare. I'm going to get some more people coming in. Okay, so this is a challenge. And, we can't really fix this with the pan knob or level. This is an offset problem. And we want to adjust this with time and measurement, okay? So those differing values are going to cause a problem. So really what we need to do is push this microphone out and get it the same distance away from the snare drum that the other microphone is. That's where we want to start, right? Because now when we pan these two microphones out left and right, the phantom image in the center will be the snare drum. Now, we're not concerned about the toms or any of that stuff. Let those distances be different because they support the localization of where the toms are in that stereo mix. You following me there? Like the offset in time up to those two microphones from the tom-toms is needed. That's how you get the positioning of it, right? But if you do this, it will be much, much more like what you're going to do with the toms. Now, I will say this: if you space this out like this to get the snare image centered and adding correctly to the center image of that of the close mic snare, look at what it does to the first rack tom there, right? That's actually in the center of the image. So, if you're going to be one of those guys, and I don't mean this in a demeaning way, where you're going to take that first rack tom and pan it all the way out to the other side, well, your overhead is going to pull against it. Usually, I'll just speak for me here. This is just me here. Usually, if I'm going to use a pair of spaced overheads, and it's going to be a big part of my drum sound, my tom panning matches the placement in the overhead mics. I don't have it be wildly left and right, and especially so in PA work where you've got large propagation distances and differences between the left and the right PA. Okay? So the idea here is how accurately can we space this pair of microphones to get it to add really, really well with that close mic that is centered in our left-right mix. That's the challenge here, right? Because once we do that, then those two microphones are going to, those two snare drums, I should say, those two versions of the snare drum are going to add together great. Because the other challenge that we have with this, right, is we're going to have an arrival time of the snare drum up to one mic, and arrival of the snare drum mic, up to the other mic that are different. And as long as those are panned out, we may not hear the tonal problem. But if we collapse those back to mono, or our mix goes back to mono, now we have comb filtered snare drum in that center position, right? It's actually happening as well in the phantom image. It's just harder to pick up until you turn the pan pot center, right? So I got one from Tim here. It says, I literally use a measure stick to place overhead equal distance from the snare and then tweak the position a bit to make sure it's not just miking a single cymbal. Yeah, we'll talk. Yeah, he's showing it to you on screen there. Yeah, I'm going to prove to you here, hopefully here, that distance is only part of the issue here. You know, you can have two mics that are the exact same distance and yet have their phase response in terms of addition still not be great. All right, so I'm going to demonstrate that to you here as part of what I got the snare drum in here for. Mono mixing is the old is new again thing. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, you know, again, if you're trying to add spaced mics to close mics, this is important. And I know it sounds convenient to say it, but I'm just telling you, once I started doing this and really paying attention to this, I noticed it immediately. And the other place I've noticed it is if people have sent me tracks where overhead placement is all out of whack. You know, it's just so hard to get the kit to glue together when you're putting it together. Now, again, just some guidelines on this. If you're not using the overheads for drum mics, you're using them strictly for cymbal mics, you're not going to get a great result doing this. It's almost not worth your time. I might still try to do it somewhat visually, but you know, it's just not going to have the impact that you're looking for there. Just let them be cymbal mics and off you go. All right, so I think at this point, yes, this is what we're going to do today to do this. Now, I've kind of built this in. Let me get this up here. Get this up on camera where you can see it here. So I've kind of built a little rig to do this. I used to carry around a little speaker and set it on the snare drum and, you know, all those kinds of things, but it just got to be honestly too much of a hassle and took too much time. So I wanted to get a way to really, really do this quickly and be able to walk up on stage, I mean, literally with my rig, take the snare drum out, put this snare drum in, measure, and have it be done in, you know, in 5 minutes. I wanted to have it be a self-contained rig, so that's what I've built here. Actually, I'm going to stop for a question. Michael, you got a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just looking at doing the single stereo, doing the angle instead from, and what I mean by angle is kind of centered over the snare, but aimed at rack 2. Instead of aiming it dead forward, aiming it at rack 2 and the ride. And that way I still preserve my stereo image.
Your tom image, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Great tip. Did everybody pick up what he's saying there? Like in my situation, I had that just for the diagram. Maybe I'll go back to it here. Yeah, here we go. So he's saying, you know, I have the obviously the image pointed straight forward here, straight left and right. And he's saying just turn that thing about 30 degrees and aim it toward the ride cymbal. Is that right? And that way you can preserve your tom panning if you want to pan it out, but not lose the center image of the snare.
Yeah, I still live in the 80s, I guess, a little bit. I need that as tom's panned.
Nothing wrong with it. I mean, I used to do exactly the same thing because I used to run, because, you know, getting a placement on this microphone can get tough. I actually used to do exactly that, only I came at it from the other angle. Like my boom would be up where the green sign is on the screen, and I would boom over the ride cymbal and let those toms go the way they go and still have the mic in the center. So it's like, you know, you're kind of taking it and turning it and aiming at the ride cymbal. I'm coming at it from the other side, and it works absolutely fine. You just got to remember your panning might be backwards there in your overhead. You know.
And I was just going to say, you know, it depends which way you like to think with your panning.
Yeah, is that your right or my right? Wait a minute, stage right or house right? I don't know. Yeah.
Pick one, go with it.
Yeah. But yeah, totally valid point there. Totally valid. All right, so let's see. Yeah, we were going back here. So I just built this little rig. I literally took a snare drum shell and built a speaker up, put a powered speaker in it with a USB interface, so that I can literally just walk up, take the guy's snare drum out of the snare stand, put this in place, and make this measurement. And it just works fantastic. I'm going to give you a real view of it here. Let's see if I got it here. Yeah, there it is. That's the one that's in the room today. So we'll talk about the block diagram and stuff for it here. But notice I've even got the mic, the close mic clipped to the snare drum, so that I can take that measurement if I want to do it. Like if any of you guys are into the whole concept of, pushing your close mic back up to the overhead, well, this is a simple way to do it here. You're just going to take an impulse off that close mic and then see how far it needs to go up to the overhead mic. All right. So the way I do it is, I got all the mic cables just kind of dangling there, and we're just going to plug in one microphone at a time and make a reference, and then move the other mic until we get the other mic to lay right on top of it. Okay. So that's what we're going to do here today. Let's go back to this. So just in terms of the layout, this little Galaxy audio speaker just seemed to work out so good to do this. So one of the things I do, though, is I create a loop back for the pink noise from Smart. I don't do their kind of internal patch thing because of the added latency of the interface. So to do this, you just direct the pink noise from Smart to the output of this device, and then take it into your powered speaker. And in this case, it had a preamp output from that I could loop right back to the second channel of the USB interface, as you can see there. And then we're just going to plug the different microphones into the interface and make the measurements. Okay. All right. So let's see. I think that's where we're at here. Yeah. Let's do this. Get back here. Give me a minute. I'm going to switch mics again and try to not get my cables all hooked up and all that stuff. All right, back on the on the headset. All right, give me 1 second here. Let me go to snare line. Oh, let me get the FFT screen up here too. All right. Okay, so to start, I'm just, and I'll do this. So usually when I'm doing this, I will work with this first placement. I actually listen to it a little bit in the drum kit, like I'll have the drummer play, and I usually do the floor tom side first, and just try to get some sense of height placement over the kit that is going to be somewhat balanced between the toms, the cymbals, etc. If you got a big cymbal player, you might end up having to pull that microphone up kind of high. It just depends. But I try to at least get a position there that feels like I'm going to catch all the cymbals on the right or the left-hand side, and the toms feel balanced, etc. Okay, so that's the placement first. So obviously in here I'm in a very, very tight space. How much width I can get on it is really dictated by the room here. But this is going to be a spaced pair, and we're just going to take it from there. Okay, so I'm going to grab the floor tom side first, which is this guy, and we'll use that as our reference. Okay. All right. All right, so obviously we got to do a delay locator first. And 3.69 milliseconds, that looks about right for the distance, yeah? I'm going to do something about like that. You can see how acoustically perfect my room is here. Not. Okay, so we're just going to store that now. All right, so we've got that stored in. Now we're just going to look at the other microphone. against it. All right, that's the idea. Now I'm gonna make my friend Tim angry here, because I have a tape measure here. All right, so I'm going to measure the distance from this snare source up to the first mic that we measured. Right at about 47, and I'm going to measure this. There's 47. So they're the same distance from the snare right now, but as you can see, the phase response is not great on it, right? I mean, it's not going to match up with that other one really, really great here. And what you need to do is just physically start moving this microphone until you get these two traces to lay right on top of each other. Now, again, they need to be the same microphone because they need to have the same response, same phase characteristics, all right? This is much more difficult to do, almost impossible to do with different mic topologies. But if we move it over, okay, so now you can see those two mics are going to add together, I mean, nearly perfectly there, in reference to the snare drum, right? So I'm going to go ahead and store that. And we'll turn the noise off. Okay, and you know, you can, it's amazing how easily you can do this once you start getting good at it. And the other part of it I would say to you after you start doing it a few times is you'll start to see it. You know, you'll start to look at the kit and go, no, hang on, that mic's got to be over here, blah, 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 blah. Curious what that measure after alignment, tell me later. Okay, Tim, I will talk about it, no problem. But, you know, the way you can kind of check yourself on this measurement, too, is just let that noise run and listen to those two microphones in the console, right? And if that alignment is as good as you think it is, you should be able to reverse polarity on one of them and create some serious cancellation there, right? So let's try to do that here. Hang on, I'll try to get some noise happening here. You guys will have to I haven't set up the playback today. You'll have to let me know whether you hear this okay. Let's see, let's do this. All right, so I'm going to send you these overheads. Let's see, can I do this? Let's see this. Yeah, there we go. All right, here they come. Can you guys hear that okay? Sound like pink noise? All right, that's both overhead mics listening to that pink noise coming out of that speaker, right? And I'm just going to reverse the polarity on one of those microphones. And I'll try to shut up because my mic will make it duck. That's polarity reversed. Right? So really what that should tell you is, man, that's a really good alignment. And what it's also going to tell you is when I pan that sucker out left and right, whatever that source was is going to come up dead center in that left-right microphone, right? It's going to add perfectly with that center close mic of the snare, okay? What do you think so far? Now, what you all should be thinking at this point, I'm sure is, dude, I don't have time to do that crap. Are you kidding? But I'm telling you, once you kind of do it a few times, you'll start to get a sense of it. I'll tell you a funny story here. And I actually started playing with this guy about it at one of these shows. I was at a television award show that I was mixing, and I had done this. I'd come in early with the drum kit and got my overhead placement right. And, of course, the mics were not symmetrical on the kit. They were actually kind of bent a little bit. But the alignment was right. And I had kind of taking a break, whatever. We had that kid up on stage and went to get something to drink, some coffee, come back, and the mics had been moved out to symmetrical. I was like, well, who moved my mics? You know, so I could tell that he just kind of swung it. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to swing this back in. I'll just double check it later. Put it back, went off, did something else, back out front, sit down at the console. I look up there, microphones are back out symmetrical. I was like, it's a video guy. Keeps walking up on the drum kit and moving the microphone so it looks better on camera. I was like, hey, no, don't do that anymore. You know? And once I explained it to him, he was okay. He was like, oh, I'm just trying to make it look really good. You know, I was like, I don't care how it looks. You know, yeah, probably video director. Yeah, you got that right, that right, Mark. All right, so again, just to kind of prove that this is working this way, the other thing you can do here, I mean, you can use this method if you don't have smart. You know, you could use this method, just plug up some noise. If you can get some way of monitoring those two mics, you can start moving, you know, put one in place, start moving another one until you get full cancellation and have the same result here, you know, as long as it's coming from that snare location. But to kind of prove this, I'll open these mics back up again and move the microphone now away from alignment, right? So you should be able to hear, well, if the arrival time's not exactly the same on from that device, it should open up some frequencies that are going to get through. And given that we've got it canceled, the frequency sets that you hear would be the frequencies that would cancel in normal polarity, right? These would be the comb filter frequencies that would actually cancel when you mono this up, okay? So here we go. All right, here we go. I'm going to move the mic here with the noise running. Oh, actually, I got to get the polarity reverse in here. 1 second. Right? So that would be, you know, that comb filtering that you hear there. Actually, I'll let you hear it because you can actually hear it in the noise. And that sounds very comb filtered to me. That would be the summed frequency response on your snare drum. You know, it would cut a lot of the top end out of it. It would really push on the top end, you know. Dude, where's my car? Nice. Oh, okay. So we'll take another question here. This is from Kurt. Hey, Kurt, thanks for coming in, man. Oh, you're asking me this privately, so I'll ask it, or I'll answer it privately unless you want me to answer it publicly. Want to just give me a read on it now?
Public's fine. I didn't realize it was a private message.
Yeah, that's okay. So his question is, can this impact the image or balance of the other drums and cymbals? And if so, how do you compensate for it? Well, kind of as I said earlier, I'm going to try to get some assessment of that before my first reference of the balance between cymbals and drums there, and get that first microphone placed in a place that I think is good. And then on the other side, again, I'll just speak to experience here. What I have found is, usually once I get that microphone in phase, the actual balance on that side of the kit's better as well. Because I think we have a tendency sometimes to get that microphone, especially on the hi-hat side, in way too far because it's centered. We're trying to symmetrically center those mics on the kit. So once you get it out a little bit, then the hi-hat bleed, everything, I don't even call it bleed, the hi-hat sound, the cymbal sound against the snare in that side microphone is actually better. So there's no way to really compensate for it. You can't blend there with anything other than distance or player. But the thing we can control is I can make the arrival time of the center piece of that overhead, meaning the snare drum, be right. That's what I reference it entirely on. You know, everything after that is a matter of height or getting the player to calm down. You know, but I got to control what I can control there. Does that make sense to you? All right, let's see, where do we go from there? we are going to go back to... Oh, I'm sorry. You know, David's got his hand raised too. I'm sorry, David. Go ahead, man. I didn't see you there.
Hey, can you compensate for that with delay times within the console? Like you say you're back at the console and it's not right. Can you tweak it with some delay time, or that doesn't have the same effects?
It's a great question, and you can, but it's a little bit of a Band-Aid. You'll never get the phase responses to lay right on top of each other. But you
at
can,
all frequencies, you mean? Like
yeah.
at one frequency you'll get the fix, and then the rest of them it won't work.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be better. Don't get me wrong, but it's still not quite as good. It'll have a hard time getting that to center. I've had to do it in recording, like where I've gotten tracks that have been way out of balance. Really, at that point, your only source is to use delay on the early arrival and push it out to try to get that image to center up. But to my ears, it just never quite worked right. You know, I mean, it's okay. It's a good Band-Aid, but if you can be better, you know. And that's honestly the moral of the story here is when you have time to do these sorts of things, you should do them. You know, you should take the time to do them. They will make your life easier without question. Because what ends up happening, I'll tell you what ends up happening mix-wise if you don't take care of this properly. What you end up invariably doing is either high-passing farther up to get the positionally corruptive snare out of the overheads so that your close mic snare comes forward more, right? That it's not being competed against. And then now you've kind of taken away the kind of the coolness and the magic of the overhead mix because you're having to filter it up and get the snare drum out of it to get it to position right. Or maybe you put some delay in there to get it to position right, but it's still not right. So you end up not using as much of that overhead as you might normally use, you know. So again, you know, if we're going to take the approach that we're craftsmen, you got to do it right. You know, you got to find ways to really make every detail of it better, you know. And I'll tell you right now, the studio guys that I've shown this to that do it, man, they are all over it. They are on board. They just go, I just my overhead mix now just sounds so much better and is so complimentary of my close mics now, you know. So it works. It absolutely works. I know I'm petty. You know, I had it out there. We had a guy named Fumi that was doing the stage, micing the stage and putting everything up. And he actually, I mean, he bought into it with me. I explained why I was wanting to do this, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, Robert, you're never going to get the stands in the same place every day." I was like, "Yeah, we can." And he came up with a jig. I mean, basically this just puzzle jig that fit against the stand that would get all the angling right. We had the position right, and then if I would just check it with a little bit of noise, you know, randomly. But, you know, I could tell after a while, I was like, yeah, that's right. And it was good every day. Because on Petty, I was actually doing a combination of 2 split mics plus a stereo overhead that were all in phase. So the position of those, you know, 4 mic channels were really critical. I had to get it really right to really reinforce that snare drum sound. It says, are you close micing cymbals or just using the overheads? I am, for my work, I almost always just use the overheads. I mean, there are times, I didn't mean to sound like I'm bagging on the video guy there. You know, there's going to be times where you're just not going to be allowed to put up overheads visually, you know, for a video shoot, etc. And sometimes you'll have to just use them as cymbal mics. I typically hate it. But that said, there are certain styles of music, I mean, rap, hip-hop, even pop music, where the overhead, you know, an overhead drum sound is not really what's called for there. But certainly in rock and guitar bass and stuff, that it's called for there. It's part of the sound there. Can you do a drum mixing seminar? Well, sure I can. You know, I just got to get it on the list, right? All right. So let's see. What else was I going to show you? Oh, I was going to show you how to deal with the close mic here as well. So let me get the noise back on. Hang on. All right, so the microphone that is in right now is the close mic. And as you can see, it is obviously arriving way earlier than any of the overhead stuff. In fact, I'll try to get this up here where you can kind of see it. Option command plus. So you can see there it's way earlier than the center line, so it's showing up way earlier than overheads. So if we wanted to delay that back, we would just at this point run the delay locator, and it's telling us it's 2.9 milliseconds out of the overheads. So you would add that delay time. Get this down here where you can see it. Oh. There you go, 2.9 milliseconds of difference. So that would be the time you would add to your snare drum to get it up to the overheads, right? I mean, really just as simple as that if you want to do it. Now, I would say to you this, just as a word of warning, and you know, be careful doing those kind of pushes on your kit, because now, I mean, you've basically changed the time the drums are arriving at that microphone. You know, not arriving at the microphone, but the addition of it. You've kind of changed the spatial alignment of the kit now. I mean, in those situations, I'm guessing that you would push the toms up there as well, and the bass drum up there as well, for that matter, to try to get them to add together. But now, you know, it's like the cymbals are going to get hit, and they're going to happen at a different time than what they would normally happen compared to the snare. You know, that has always made me really uncomfortable doing that. I just think, I don't think I want to do that. But I'm not here to tell you can't. But, you know, do it precisely if you want to do it. You know, it's an easy way to do it right there if you want to do it. Okay, how are we doing here on time? Wow, we're cooking along. All right, so let me get out of this. And we're going to go back to PowerPoint here, I believe. Yeah. So this is a cool little rig. I mean, you can build it pretty cheaply. I literally just went to a pawn shop and bought a $10 snare drum shell and built it into it. So I just carried in a little fiber drum case that goes with me with my tools. So off you go. All right, so here's what you need to consider with transducer alignments, right? You need to fully understand the goal of your alignment. And I guess probably the best example of that is, you know, if we had that jazz kit where we might want to leave the snare positioned off center in those overheads to reinforce what people are seeing right there in a sound reinforcement environment, then okay. But don't misdirect that back to pop and rock where you have a center positioned snare drum. You know, so understand your goal. And the second part of it is give this process the correct priority in the day. Your show is going to happen regardless of whether you get this done or not, right? This is not a show-stopping event. We don't hold doors to do this kind of thing. But when you have the opportunity to make these kind of assessments and get them right, as good audio engineers, you should do it, right? All right, let's go talk about a juicy one here. This one always generates a lot of discussion. Aligning vocal mic bleed with close mics. All right. Have any of you guys ever considered this concept? Yeah, I know Tim has, because we have talked about it many times. Get back on this microphone. There we go. All right, so this is what we're going to talk about here today. So, you know, the thing I always run across with people that are contemplating doing this is they no, they move too much. Still, I'm gonna say to you, Michael, you still might want to consider it, and I'll explain why. So, but I was going to say the challenge people come up with this a lot of times is they think they need to delay the vocal mic, and it's not. You don't want to delay the vocal mic here because it's got the late arriving information in it. Remember, think of this vocal mic as if it's an ambient mic for the instruments on stage, right? Have the vocalist not sing and listen to it. You'll understand the sources you need to align with are actually late arriving to that vocal, okay? Now, when you're kind of assessing whether you're going to do this or not, more often than not, you're going to pick the thing that is the most corruptive to the vocal. And usually, way more often than not, it's drums, right? It's cymbals. It's the snare drum goes all flat and wacky when I have the drum kit and the vocal up to the right level. You know, those kind of things are happening in your mind. And really what you're having happen there is, you know, you're having a comb filter happen there, right? I mean, where that ambient, or that ambient mic, which is the vocal, is going to comb filter the sound of your drums. It's going to EQ it to death. So we want to try to get a little better phase response there. So in this situation, it's normally the drums. And if you don't have live drums on stage, you may not need to do this, you know, but usually if you have live drums on stage, you might want to consider this, especially if you have a quiet singer. That's where it's really, really going to rear its ugly head. And these techniques that I'm going to talk to you about here, not only for this, but also for front fill alignment, you know, these are things that work exceptionally well in small places. You know, like where you got, you know, a band on stage that are kind of tight to each other, and yet, you know, a PA, maybe a stacked PA, a small club or whatever. This kind of approach can really, really help you there. So, you know, I would chime in on this if you could do it. In this situation, though, the drums is going to be the issue that we're going to deal with. So the question becomes, okay, how do we do this? The vocal mic bleed is acting as the ambient mic for stage instruments. And as Michael said, well, no, why would I do this? They're moving too much. Well, what you want to do is, at least this is the agenda that I use to do it. I want it to be right. I want it to be as good as possible when he's in the worst place, right? Because remember how comb filters work. They work on delay and amplitude, right? Time and amplitude. So let's say, for instance, even though I might have a singer up on stage here who's running all over the place, there's probably going to be some point in the show, maybe way more than one, where he's right in front of the drum kit, standing and singing. And that is probably the time that it's the worst, right? So if I'm good there, it's going to be better almost everywhere else. It won't be perfect everywhere else, but it'll be better than it was before. Now, the place that it'll get squirrely, if you got somebody that's running all over the place, is if he runs to the drum kit and dumps up on the drum riser. Then of course it's, you know, all bets are off at that point anyway. You know, now you've, you know, quadrupled the amplitude of the drum kit into the vocal mic. So, you know, you're done there anyway. So my point is, don't be scared of it. Pick a place where you want it to be really good and align for that. Okay? And again, you got to kind of pick and choose when to do this. This is not a one-size-fits-all thing. If you've got a vocalist where this is not a problem, you may not want or need to do this. All right? So we got to get that distance. How do we get that distance? Well, in this situation, we're really not worried about phase per se, right? We're just worried about distance. I just want to get some sense of how far I've got to push that these close microphones back to that lead vocal. And remember, that's what's got to happen here. You're going to take close microphones on stage. In the case of the drums, you're going to take all of the drum mics on stage and push them back to this distance. You follow me there? I guess I should say push them forward to this distance. It's where this gets kind of hard to, you can get kind of lost in it mentally. But remember, the transit time in your console from the snare drum to the close mic is going to be 1 inch. The transit time from the snare drum to the lead vocal mic is going to be 10 feet, 12 feet, 14 feet, 16 feet, right? So that's the amount of delay you're going to want to put on it. And you're going to want to avoid the temptation of just delaying the drums, right? Because now you will have disjointed your mix in the console. So you would want to take all of those close line, or those close mic backline mics, and push them to that vocalist, right? So I promise you, it's capable of being done. I have done it for about the past 20 years with Petty. So you know, this was a life-saving trick on that particular show because he was such a quiet singer, and Steve Ferroni was such a gorilla on the drum kit, you know. But here's the other thing that, you know, might give you some pause. Christopher, I'll be right with you on your question in 1 second, right after this thought. Here's something to think about with regard to kind of where people get uncomfortable. It's like, well, wait a minute, are you going to push the band out of time with the singer now by doing this? Well, here's something you need to consider. Remember how propagation works. If that singer is taking his timing cues from the acoustic drum kit, meaning maybe he's not on ears. Even if he is on ears, he may not have a whole lot of close drums in his ears. He may be taking it from the bleed that's coming into his microphone. Then he's already 16 milliseconds behind the band, right? If it's 16 feet there, he doesn't know it, but he's already singing late to the band. And by you doing this, you're actually going to tighten his performance to the band members because of the propagation offset here. All right. So, sorry, I gotta let somebody in. And Christopher, go ahead with your question there, man. Christopher Dean, are you there? Let me see if he's here. Hello, Christopher. Are you there? Come in. Come in. All right, I'm going to let it go then.
Oh, I'm sorry.
there he
I'm
is.
having mute problems. When you're moving microphones in the time domain, how does that factor into your manual delay compensation?
Has to be in addition to it. You have to compartmentalize those things. You have to do your compensation and then deal with your acoustic alignments. Now, in this situation, yeah, usually the way I would do that, because I was doing a lot of manual comp, when I was out with Petty, is I would do this work at the group stage, right? And you really just kind of got to do some balancing and some checking, just kind of go, okay, am I getting it out of whack, or is this actually better? You have to do some evaluation of it here, because you're going to move things with regard to those vocals. But in that situation, it absolutely improved it. 100% improved it. So, I have, as you guys, if you've watched my things on mixing and grouping, et cetera, I had a group for every family of instruments, meaning it drums, bass, guitars, each one of the guitars, keyboards, et cetera. So I could delay those at the group level to get them to catch up with that vocal, all right? As opposed to trying to add more time on all the inputs. That would have been, I won't say impossible, but just way too difficult to manage, right? You follow me there? All right, so you're gonna delay these early arriving mics to get in time with the bleed. And you can kind of play around with phase here if you want to do it. Sometimes, or I should say play around polarity here. Sometimes reversing the polarity on the actual vocal will actually help that bleed problem a little bit once you get it more in time, right? Just reversing it without kind of doing any time adjustment will just be kind of one's a little better than the other, not much. But once you get some time adjustment here, that polarity button can actually have some real impact here. So don't be afraid to try that as well. Okay, so let's talk about optimizing for vocal bleed. So works best, as Michael pointed out, for stationary vocal mics. It's always going to work best for that. But I say don't let that dissuade you from doing it on somebody who's moving as well. I did it on Matchbox 20 as well, and Rob was all over the stage, and I still felt like it improved what I was doing, especially when he was down center, singing ballads or, standing at the mic. Yes, and Flash I can't say your last name, bro. Flash is saying, assuming you're not also doing monitors from the same console. Absolutely. Absolutely. Although I will say this. I'll say this. If you had a singer up there and he was taking his cues from the acoustic drum kit, then this is a problem. If he's taking his cues from the close mics, then you wouldn't want to do it. You want to keep him in time. But you might want to play around with that a little bit in terms of trying to get his bleed to be better in his ears, be a little more usable in his ears. If it's just bleed going into his ears from the back line, you're not going to be able to have any impact. But if he has close mics going into his ears along with that bleed, you could play around with that a little bit and see if you could get a better result for him. I wouldn't be too worried about what it's going to do to him performance-wise there. Might actually improve it. All right, so avoid the temptation, as I mentioned earlier, to only align the corrupting source, meaning the drums. If you're going to move the drums, you got to move the instruments as well. Don't be afraid to do it. And again, it kind of plays back into that concept of grouping, you know, why you want to do grouping. These kind of options open up to you if you do audio subgrouping. Another question from my friend Wayne here. Do you ever have occasion where all of these various delay compensations add up to a bit too much overall delay? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why this is all situational. You got to be careful here. Although I will say this, and you're going to see this in this upcoming segment here, you can actually trade one alignment for the other here. Like, you know, if you did this kind of alignment, you might be amazed, at least I was anyway. It was also almost one of those situations where it felt like, oh my gosh, all the tumblers of the universe just clicked into place here. Where when I did this close mic delay to get it back in time with the bleed, I almost needed no delay time on my front fill to get it in time with it. It's like I swapped that alignment and it worked out great, which is what we're going to do here with the front fill alignment as well. We're going to trade one alignment for another. Okay, so, but yes, you absolutely have to pay attention to that, especially in small places. You might end up with, you know, the back line in front of the PA, so to speak, as has been known to happen. All right. The other thing you want to be aware of here is creating, you know, as I said, kind of offset for your 2-track bus. You know, maybe it's a record bus, maybe it's a stream bus. You know, we're kind of disjointing the music here to make it acoustically line up at that microphone a little better. So, you know, that can be a little bit of a challenge. I certainly had a way of doing it on Petty that seemed to work really well, which I'll explain in this next segment here. And that is, I'm going to give the show away here, but using discrete groups for alignment versus, for stage alignment versus the 2-bus mixing that would not have those times in it, okay? And I'll talk about how to do that if you want to get into that. All right, so let's talk about front fill now, alignment for a live stage. And I want to emphasize that this is for a live stage. There are live guitar amps, there are live drums on stage, and that's when this becomes an issue and a problem and something that we want to take care of. And it's also something that I don't want to say I've battled, that's too strong a word, but I've had some really serious conversations with system tuning guys, because to get this right kind of requires that they go into an area of the show that they normally feel very uncomfortable going or getting into, and that is making noise happen out of guitar amps and things like that to do this kind of alignment. You know, usually they want to treat that front fill and that PA system all as one thing, but unfortunately there's a back line up there happening that's causing just havoc in the near field down there, absolute havoc down there. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is something I've been doing for many, many, many years, which is taking the front fill and getting it in time with the back line. All right, not aligning the front fill to the PA system or PA system to the front fill. Now, if you've got a dead stage, there's no audio sources to speak of coming up there, then you would want to align your front fill to the PA system. You would want to create a single source there. But if you've got a back line happening here that's of any kind of volume, you really want to align the front fill to that, because it's the corrupting source. That back line is the corrupting source for that front fill, and it will just sound awful down there until you do it. It'll just sound smeared and just not good. The impulse will be terrible on it. So there's a couple different ways you can do this in front fill. I've got kind of a spaced front fill here. And notice that you might need a separate time on that center one if you're trying to have that reinforce a center stereo image. If this is mono, these can all be the same time. If these are discrete, then you might want some different time on that center one to get it to reinforce that phantom image a little better than it currently would with the same time. But that only really works in stereo down there. So like on Petty, we were doing LCR. This was all discrete times there. But once you get the time set, you could also then put some arcing in that if you wanted to do it. You could use time to put arcing in that and push, create one time that goes back then. Like if you use the delay time in your processor to create some arc there, then you could take the entire thing back probably as one time to your drum kit or however you're going to do it, okay? So here's the thing though, and this is where this is where the practicality of this gets cool and where you can get kind of tricky with this. And again, it's what I'm going to say at the end of this is very situational. You've got to be able to assess the situation and see if you can effectively solve this problem. Once you get this front fill aligned with the back line, whether you're going to take the speakers and push them to the back line, or you're going to take the close mics and delay them coming out of this set of speakers to be in time with the back line. Either way works. What you're going to get then is a really good phase response of that stage sound, right? And I even, like when I'm doing this down here, I try not to do it necessarily in stereo as we're going to see here, or as in mono, I should say. I try to do it in stereo so I can have some localization that goes along with this in that near field because it becomes meaningful down there. But the overall phase response in that zone between the front fill and the back line actually ends up becoming really good. You end up situation, I've had guys say this to me before when they're listening to drums down there going, wow, all the sound sounds like it's coming right from the drum kit, even though they're listening to the speakers there, you know. That if you can make that happen, you're really, really in a good spot down there, all right? Because that's what I want it to sound like down there. I want it to sound like a back line with vocals down in that front field zone, okay? So the phase is really good there. But of course, we're going to have a problem because there's going to be a zone out in front of the PA where this front fill is not going to align with the PA. We've created two different compartments here, right? And they're not going to align out there. But here's where the practicality comes in. That's okay. And here's why. Because you're going to have people come in and stand in front of that front fill. And they're going to block really all of the mid-range from getting out to that zone where the alignment is critical, right? You're counting on some people being down there. But if we do this, the listening response of those people that are down close, their experience is so much better. Especially in the day and age where we got PA systems where we can be very precise in terms of coverage and keep the PA from leaking down into that front field zone. Now those people have a really, really good experience down there, right? And then, you know, the rest of the crowd comes in and they actually have pretty good phase response, except for maybe the people right up at the very front that might get some leakage from that front fill. You know, the offset here is not going to be enough to really mess with the bottom end or the low mids. It's really in the mid range that it's going to get messed with. The flip side of it is you take the front fill and align it to the PA system, and now the entire audio quality down there is corrupted by the back line. Anything off the back line that has any kind of amplitude is going to sound awful down there because the time offset is no good. Right? You can get it close. You can get it close. But compared to the two, I've just done this more times than I care to mention by comparing it. Comparatively, I'll take the front fill aligned to the back line every single time, right? Especially in a big show. Now, this is, if you want to talk about a smaller show where you might have where a small PA in the front, etc. Man, this is the money move. I'm telling you. You know, you get that PA system aligned with that back line in a small acoustic space, and you're going to have some fun. And usually I suggest people do that with the microphones at that point. Just align the microphones through the speaker system back to those sources, and the imaging is just fantastic. You'll never catch yourself trying to fight over volume. It'll just feel like the guitar player is playing on stage, and when he solos, he just comes forward. You know, I mean, it works so smoothly. It's not even funny. All right, let me just take a look through the chat here. I saw a lot of chat coming in here. Yeah, Tim is right there. He's saying it really only matters where the coverage overlaps, and that's right. And that's that zone I'm talking about down there that is either yellow or red there. That's the overlap zone, right? So obviously, the more pattern control you have, etc., the better off you're going to be. How does the drum fill sub impact alignment? It absolutely can. And again, and this is where it becomes situational, right? You have to pick what is the corruptive source down there. Is it the cymbals and the acoustic bass drum, or is it this monster drum fill? You may need to align to the drum fill. Okay? You know, and that's a matter of just, you know, get the monitor guy to run some noise through there, do your FFT, and get that impulse, find out what it is. You know, the challenge we have with this a lot of times in digital is that we can't, you know, it's hard to use a rangefinder anymore, because we can't just do this on pure distance because there's latency in the path that is feeding the speakers, right? So you got to be very cognizant of that. You know, you can I mean, especially if we're doing some of these other alignments here. This is kind of what I was talking about when I said trade alignments here. Like if I do that alignment where I've pushed the instruments back to that vocal bleed, well, now I need way less delay time on that front fill to get that piece of it to be in time with the back line, right? It may just be 1 or 2 milliseconds of delay there on top of that instrument delay. You follow me there? So you've kind of traded one delay for the other there. If you're just going to push the speakers back, then you're gonna lose the opportunity to do that alignment to the vocal bleed. Then you're kind of conceding that one. So you got to really compartmentalize it here. You got to kind of do it in steps. Obviously, latency on the console, you got to deal with that, and then it's propagation of bleed to instruments, and then it's system alignment down there. And again, that's why I kind of treat that front fill separately, right? It doesn't really impact that. All right. So how about stereo front fill? This actually can work really good, really, really good here. So if you were doing something like this, then pushing back microphones actually works really good for localization. Now you've got great localization. If you keep your panning in play here, the people that are on the right will hear the guitar player that's on the left coming from the left, etc. If you've got enough horizontal coverage here to do that, this can actually work really, really good. I did this for a long, long time before we did the LCR thing, and it worked really good. And same thing applies there, right? We have a good zone of phase between the stage and the front fill. In an empty environment, we're going to have a poor zone. We're going to have a zone of interaction here between the PA and the front fill that's not going to be very good. But once we start filling this in with people, those things kind of sort themselves out because amplitude of that front fill drops down to that zone, so it releases the comb filter a little bit. My good buddy Matt McQuaid has got his hand up. Go there, dude.
Hey, quick question for you. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So you're delaying the front fill system to the back line, and then you're treating it as 2 separate systems. You have a front fill PA system, then you have your house reinforcement system, or are you then delaying your mains back to the front fills, which are already aligned to the back line? Is there a 2-step process?
No, it's 2 systems.
Okay.
And keep in mind, if that's a flown PA, like we had out on Petty, right, it's already late. You wouldn't be delaying that any. Right? If it's a trim height of 22 feet.
Right, you're going to incur latency there already for propagation delay to get to that.
Yeah, it's already late. You wouldn't want to push it back. Matter of fact, by doing this, you're actually getting it closer to the PA.
Right. So I'm just thinking of delay times. Normally, like if I had a PA trimmed out at 25 and I had a front fill and I did an outer and an inner pair, I might end up at 22 on the outer pair, maybe 26 or 28 on the inner, which is probably the distance from the front fill to the back line anyway.
Yeah. That's right. Those outer ones should be, longer times, really.
Yeah. So okay, I guess that makes sense. Because if I wanted to check and see if there was a difference between those 2 zones, I could go back and measure, and I bet it would be somewhere like between 1 and 2 milliseconds at that point if you've already taken it.
I think when me and Vic did all those measurements, remember when we were doing all those experiments with the front fill spacing at Sony when we were there? That's what we were measuring. A bunch of that was, okay, if we get the phase, just the interactive phase between the components of the front fill, meaning the cabinets of the front fill, how does that actually then relate to the propagation to the acoustic sources on stage, right? Are we still in the game there, And it was just really a kind of a magic formula of finding the right spacing on those. Remember we had the Anya or the auto sub with the box on top, was getting the spacing of that right where that all just kind of triangulated correctly back to the stage.
Well, I was probably busy putting rain covers on Anya modules.
Yeah, you probably were. Oh, Mark Shotwell says, you've really got me thinking about how to align my theater. Yes, my man. This is Theater 101. I should say it's Theater 101, but this kind of stuff is so effective in theater. So effective in theater. And, when you start doing it for music, it counts as well.
So if I may for a moment.
Yeah.
So when we do concerts at our theater, our PA hangs a lot lower than like your 20 or 30 foot trim. So the way you were just talking about front fills, I'm kind of rethinking. I may try the align front fills to backline instead of with the PA and see what kind of results I get.
Yeah, I think you're going to be really, really surprised. Really surprised
yeah,
at how good it is.
Yeah, we've gone pretty typically with doing the front fill and PA as a whole source.
Uh-huh.
But
and you know, that's and I don't want to dissuade you from doing that. That's fine as long as you don't have live sources on that stage. If you don't have live sources on that stage, that's the way to do it. You would want that coherent wavefront coming into the building.
Yeah, it's just a way I really hadn't thought about. So
yeah.
That's what's been great about these classes, like little tidbits here and there that are like, oh, huh.
Yeah, you can get, I mean, I've had this happen in houses of worship that I've gone in and taken this approach there, where it dramatically improves the engagement of the pastor when his voice is in time with the front fill. You follow me there? Like his acoustic voice is actually supported by the front fill. It's not like, well, I can kind of hear him on stage, but I can hear it in these speakers here in front of me as well. When you get those two things aligned, man, it is so engaging. Because it's almost like you just hear it coming from him, not the speakers, you know, which is what we want the stage to do as well.
And at our place, you know, we go from concerts to spoken word to, you know, comedians or dance. And it seems like there's slight variations in how we want to set it up depending on what we're doing.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's orchestral or rock.
Without a doubt. So, I mean, that's exactly why I say this is situational. You've got to be able to analyze the situation and kind of do the right thing here, right?
Yeah. So yeah, some great new tools. Thank you.
Awesome. David? Yeah, I'm sorry. David's got his hand up, and then whoever spoke can get right in. David, go ahead, man.
All right. One of the things I heard was the Haas effect, which was adding like 10 milliseconds to it, so it shifts the image back to the original source. And in one of the churches I worked at, the fills in the back on the balcony were so perfectly blended and delayed that they didn't sound like they were on. And everybody kept saying, well, the speakers aren't working, So I switch them off, and they're like, oh, can you turn them up so we can hear the speakers? I'm like, no, you can't.
I fight that all the time with churches when I go in to do that for them. I mean, you know, get it where it's really good. And it's like if they're looking at a speaker, it's almost like they want to hear it coming out of there, you know.
Yeah, we pay for the speakers.
Right. There's some truth in that. And, you know, I wouldn't be afraid to use a little Haas effect sometimes. Especially, you know, Mark, in that front fill situation where you're supporting an acoustic voice per se, you know, you might need to use a little Haas effect there because you don't really want them super spot on. Otherwise, it's this kind of, you know, the ear can kind of get this phasey thing depending on how, you know, your head movement. So you might need to push it back just a little bit to draw attention that way.
Right.
But you know, it's something you can play with.
There's also the psychological effect of dealing with the client sometimes. We had an instance where the conductor or the director of this group was very anti-microphone.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up putting out some floor mics and PCCs for soloists. And I got him to a level which I felt was comfortable and you could hear the solo, but you couldn't tell it was from the PA. And then I brought her out to the house and turned the mics off. And her jaw hit the floor.
Yeah.
Because, you know, she like, oh, they can do something and you don't hear it? It's like, exactly. Yeah. And then from then on, she just let me do what I needed to do.
We go through this all the time with orchestra, you know, with you know, sound reinforcement for orchestra. Because and rightly so, you know, that audience doesn't want to hear a PA system, you know.
Correct.
And man, I've been doing that since my earliest days of audio, you know, pre-digital, trying to deal with that. And there are some incredible, as a matter of fact, we're going to cover it here in our final segment here, incredible ways to deal with that in today's world. So let's maybe jump to that here. Oh, let's go through our little overview here. So for front fill alignment, right, the approach is situational. You've got to be able to discern what's going to be the best approach there depending on what's happening on that stage. As I mentioned, don't necessarily be concerned with phase alignments like we did with the microphones and the speakers here. You're not going to get anything near that accurate. You can just be in propagation here and looking at distances and trying to get them close. Impulse is really, really the thing here. But polarity does matter. Polarity absolutely matters here. So if you push these microphones back or these speakers back to these backline instruments, you know, polarity is in play there. You're going to get them close enough to where you know, the guitar mic, the guitar amp might be canceling with the front fill. You know, you just have to be careful with it. You always want to get down there and check it. And I try to always use a delay locator to do this when I can. And I say that more than anything because of us being in digital, right, where there can be latency in the path before we ever get to propagation. We can't just trust it on pure distance at this point. We've got to get a delay locator in place and check the length of the path, right? Okay, everybody good there? Right on. Oh, and there's one more here, actually. 1 second here. Yeah, so yeah, I was just saying acceptable to use a rangefinder, but be careful with it in digital, okay? All right, so talking about orchestras, let's talk about this kind of thing for orchestras, right? Because this is a big challenge that I don't want to say near to solving, but we're getting to a point where we're going to be able to handle this so much better. So, you know, when we go to see an orchestra as an acoustic event in a space, in an acoustical space, you know, that arrival time of that acoustic energy from the stage is intentional, right? We want to be able to localize the violins house left. We want to be able to localize the cellos and the basses house right. Things like that. You know, the percussion, we want to be able to localize that in the center upstage. And traditionally, when we're doing sound reinforcement, you know, of this, what do we end up doing right at the console? Well, we end up mixing all those things together, and they all come out as one through a speaker on the left side and the speaker on the right side. And that's why this is so hard for people who love orchestra to want PA system, because it becomes a distraction. And what ends up happening is the person who's mixing, you know, tries to replicate this with panning and then make it louder than the acoustic source coming off stage so that the positions hold true. And it just never, honestly, it never really works, right? It just does not work. You can kind of get it where it's okay, but this is never optimized by any stretch for this style of music. So this is where, you know, the emergence, I should say, I'm spacing the word. Help me.
Immersive.
Immersive, thank you. I got caught in emergent there. The emergence of immersive sound, that's what I was trying to say. That was the sentence I was heading for. Is really going to deal with this really well, better than we ever dreamed about it being possible, right? Where we're going to be able to take those zones or those instruments as objects and manipulate them both in time and in distance, forward and backwards, to get the audience to be able to hear a sound reinforced version of that to the audience, right? So we have the original arrival times, and then we're going to have the original spacing and arrival times reinforced with that immersive systems. And if you've heard this, it's mind-blowing how great it can be. I mean, truly mind-blowing. Somebody talked about, you know, shutting it on and off to prove to somebody what's going on here. You do that in this situation for people, and they about pass out when they hear it, because it, you know, if you do it, if you're even half as good at mixing orchestra as you do anything, get it to sound somewhat natural, and then get the PA on top of it, man, it's a really compelling experience. But again, this is all about taking those zones and delaying them back in time to get them to sit with the acoustic source, right? That's the idea here. You're going to take those objects and push them backwards to get the arrival time from the orchestra and the PA system to be the same for as many people as you can, right? And that's the beauty of immersive, is that, you know, you end up with single sources. You don't end up with multiple sources out of speaker systems, right? So it's really cool. All right. Well, we've been discussing it, so we don't have to do a whole lot more discussing. We're right up on an hour and a half. See, I knew this was going to go long. I knew it. So, what do you think, fellas? Is this a head scratcher for you? It'll really make you think. It's going to make you really sort out what you know about time and phase and what you don't. And please, if you take any words from me today, is this: be careful with this. Go slow. Be sure. Check every possibility of things that this is messing with, and do it. But you know, that's it. This is the challenge of being a live sound guy in the year. I'm not even going to mention the year 2020. I don't even want to hear from 2020 again. But you know, being a live sound guy, this is part of our challenge. We have to deal with acoustic properties as well as electronic properties in terms of mixing, right? So you know, the studio guys really don't have to deal with anything quite like this. But this is what we have to deal with on a day-to-day. And I'm just here to tell you, the more of this you sort out, the better and easier your shows are to mix, without question. Okay? So pay attention to it, experiment with it, stay in touch with me. I'm happy to help you through it and talk about all this stuff. Okay? All right, guys. Thank you so much for your time. I'll leave it open for couple more questions if you want. There you go. Mike Shapiro's got his hand up. Mike, go ahead.
Hey, Robert. Thanks for this. I had a quick question on your preference. If you're running mono front fills and you're delaying back to your loudest source, are you typically doing your centers delayed, or are you picking the outer fills and delaying them back?
Usually what I will do is take that as one system back to the drums and then let the offset left to right just happen.
10-4. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. If I can arc it, it gets better. You know, if you have, and today we have so much, you know, discrete DSP output to those front fill zones, you can get better with it than just putting one delay time on everything, you know. So I would encourage you to do that. I wouldn't be afraid to arc it and get those times back.
Thank you.
Yeah. David R., go, man.
Back from my old days of Synodcom, one of the lessons I walked away from that is how important the time alignment was. When they first had the TEP machine, they could actually measure it, because they were like,
Amen, brother.
When things sounded like shit, you know, you would measure it with a RTA and it would look great and it would sound like shit and everything would just be a disaster. And they were like, you got time alignment problems, you know, and that was just such a great thing, that TEF machine. It was big bucks.
Well, look, I mean, not for nothing, TEF introduced us to the concept. I mean, I remember going to my first TEF seminar in 1984 and just walking out of there thinking, oh my God, we are never, ever going to get this right. I mean, all of our problems are in the time domain, not in the level domain, not in the amplitude domain. All of our problems are in the time domain in live sound.
And I mentioned Steve Haas, you know, and what a pioneer he was, and how he came up with all these concepts of the spiral and things like that, and how he looked at things in phase, and he was just amazing. That's why I wanted to know if everybody knew what Haas effect was and how important that is psychoacoustically to the ear.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. And again, Haas effect is important to use in the right situation, right? There are times to align perfectly to impulse, and then there are times to create some offset to push the image to a certain location, right? So, yeah, both of those things are very important to understand. Very important.
Yeah, and hats off to Sam Burkow for coming up with SMART. And I understand you were a pioneer of that whole. He came up to you and go, "Hey, try this shit out." And you're like, "What?"
Yeah, I had the first PA system he ever tried it on. Yeah, that was pretty funny.
Yeah,
he came up and just asked me if he could borrow my PA system for a few minutes. And I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not? Go ahead."
That's great. That's great. You know, these characters in the sound world. So thanks, Rob. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thanks for coming, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else?
Hey,
all right.
Robert,
Well,
you got one question left here from Sam Hindle. It's in the chat.
Oh, is it in the chat?
Back to your snare drum exercise. Why didn't the two mics measure the same when they are the same type of mic and they were the same distance away?
It's a great question. It has just something to do with the, I'm guessing, the axial response of the speaker, right? So
XY axis. Yep.
Yeah, it would just be, I mean, we were kind of off the coverage of that speaker, right? So I'm guessing that's part of why it didn't go so well. So would it do it with a snare drum? I mean, a snare drum is not going to have the same polar response as that speaker. You might get away with it. You know, certainly making the measurement is better than not making the measurement. I'll put it that way. Deal? Here's another one. Robert Wilcox. I have a question going back to aligning the vocal mic. If you have a singer who runs around and takes his cues from the guitar player, would you... I would still probably do the same. Well, it depends. I will say this. If the bleed into that guy's microphone is a problem, then yeah, I'm probably going to do this. If he's a quiet singer and I got the bleed problem, I'm going to do it. If he's a shouter and I don't really have any bleed into that microphone to contend with, it's not really messing with my drum sound or any other sounds, then I'm probably not going to do it.
Oh, there's plenty of guitar in that mic. There's plenty. You know, he's a shouter, but at the same time, there's a lot of guitar in that mic.
Yeah. I mean, you know, there are obviously other solutions there as well. Well, maybe we do something with the guitar sound. Do we get it aimed differently? Do we get it turned down? All of the things nobody's going to want to do, but at some point, you know, the vocal.
He ain't turning that guitar down. That ain't happening.
Lauren, you got a question as well? Go. I knew this was going to generate a lot of conversation.
Well, it's funny you mentioned like today you had a problem with your coffee machine, and you were talking about like just getting your gear stuff together there. I'm just going to say this: the other day when we were having to do this thing for CBS that airs tonight on it's called Momento Latino that we did here last 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And went in the shop. This guy's shop that we, was able to get the gear. I got the request from the producers to have one company provide everything. And so I showed the list of what I needed to start with to do that. And, if no one's been in shops for a while and everyone's furloughed, everybody or whatever, once you go in and we started firing up everything, every single piece of gear needed an update. We knew consoles needed to be updated. Shure just released an update, and so we spent more time updating servers, consoles, microphones, everything. But again, we stayed late to just make sure everything we went in, the comms, like everything needed an update.
Boy, that's a great point. I don't think I even considered that, but you're absolutely right. That is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, because what is R&D doing right now? Updates.
Yeah.
So again, just everyone just be prepared for that. Set aside that time, that you're going to need an update.
Boy, that's a great piece of very insightful advice there. Thank you, Lauren. Really, really appreciate that. That's right on, man. David, did I leave your hand up, or have you got another question?
I got it up. I got a question. Originally Tom was using a 57, and I think I remember hearing the story where you said, "Hey, can we use something else?" And he said, "Yeah, that's what the last guy said, I think, before he fired him or something." And
True
what
story.
did you end up using, with the high access, off access rejection, which could kind of help with some of those bleed issues,
Well, the thing, here's the thing always with bleed issues, that getting a tighter microphone is only going to help the bleed issues that are on the back side of the microphone. They're not going to help the stage issue at all,
Right.
So, I mean, everything on that side is coming in on axis. So, the place where I needed the help was that he had, at the point that he was using the 57, is he had 4 15-inch wedges in front of him. And, I mean, the SM57, is only cardioid down to 1,000 hertz.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an omnidirectional microphone sitting there. It was as close to impossible to get that vocal to the level it needed to be as anything I've run up against. So I really had to fight hard to do that. And I ended up switching him over to a hypercardioid Neumann, which was way more sensitive on the stage side than it was on the PA side. But at least I was able to get the monitor bleed under control, and then it was a matter of finding a way to get that the drum bleed and everything back to that microphone and get it to work. Where the bleed was actually part of the show.
The KMS 105, is that what you were using, or 104?
I was using 150s. That was the very first version of that microphone, the KMS 150.
Oh, I never heard of that. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks for that. And do you want to tell that story again of how you suggested using the 50? That was probably the first thing you thought when you saw the 57. Like, yeah, can we do something?
Well,
because guys love those. The little guys love those things.
It only took me a few minutes to hear it, even on some control room monitors, to know it was going to be a problem. Then I suffered through a whole tour of it. So.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. No, it was it was just one of those things that and the funny thing about the 57 is, they had used it a bunch for recording, and it is in the right setting, it is actually a fantastic vocal mic. I kid you not. You take that microphone and put it on a mic stand and run about a 6-foot cable out to a V77 pre, a Telefunken pre. that is a seriously great vocal sound. I'm telling you, it is off the chain great. Would I take it out and use it live? Not in a million years for somebody like him, because he's such a quiet singer. I mean, it was the double whammy there of, you know, poor mic sensitivity, quiet singer, bad polar response. I mean, it was just like this perfect storm of, you know.
You were earning the big bucks on that tour. You were definitely earning your keep on that tour.
Yeah, I asked for a raise after that one, believe me. Thanks, though. Thanks for the comments. Appreciate it. All right. Well, guys, I've hung you up long enough here. Unless we got anything else you really want to dig into here, I'll pull the ripcord here. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a 2-hour video on YouTube here. I'm going to do a little editing. So thank you for coming. I'm glad you chimed in on the conversation. Always a fun one to do. Do some experiment. Learn your smart. Learn how to operate your smart. Learn how to do those FFTs and those impulse responses and figure all this out. All right. We'll see you guys. Thanks for tuning in.